Of Deputy Thomas Pringle. Deputy Pringle, 30 seconds to introduce.
Thank you, Láscain Corla. Minister, this question just in relation to the Castle's report on the funding of higher education, and just wanted to see if I could get the departmental views in relation to the potential of a student loan scheme that could potentially add €20,000 of debt to graduating students.
Thanks very much. The report of the expert group on the future funding for higher education sets out a number of funding options for the sector, with income contingent loans being just one of those options. Other options include predominantly state-funded system or a state-funded system supplemented with continuing student fees. As the Deputy will be aware, the report is currently with the Joint Oireachtas Committee for consideration, where each of the funding models will be examined, and the process will include input from all stakeholders. I understand that the Union of Students in Ireland are one of the groups who have made a submission. It will be important to obtain political and society consensus on achieving a sustainable funding model for the higher education sector in the future, and my department and I continue to work with the committee as it undertakes this important job. However, it is important to recognise, as the Castle's report has done, that doing nothing is not an option, and that other measures to improve equality of access would also be necessary to complement any of the options that are being outlined. Funding overall for higher education sector is a key concern for me, particularly in the light of the additional pressure that will fall on the system over the next decade or so. That is why I am pleased that I have, for the first time in 9 years, secured additional funding for the sector, with €36.5 million additional being made available this year, and a projection for the coming years of increased resources that amount to €160 million over those 3 years. This includes an increase in the funding available to students from disadvantaged backgrounds and other underrepresented groups to assist them in overcoming financial barriers to accessing and completing higher education. In addition, in Budget 2017, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform and I announced a policy review with the aim of designing and implementing a sustainable and predictable multi-annual funding model for higher and further education and training, involving increased employer and exchequer contributions from 2018. The review will be undertaken as part of the overall response to meeting the anticipated skill needs in the economy over the coming years, in line with the policy framework set out in the National Skills Strategy. It will include an analysis of the business case for enhanced investment in the higher and further education and training sectors, and of the most effective funding mechanisms to deliver outcomes in respect of our ambitions in that area. In this context, it will identify key elements of the new funding model and of the expected impacts, including those on employers. The review will include consultation with stakeholders, and I expect to have the work completed by the end of April 2017.
Minister, for your response. I'm a bit confused just about the review that you outlined there as happening. I mean, obviously that's happening in parallel or against the work of the Oireachtas Committee in relation to the Castle's report, and seems to me as if it would be covering an awful lot of the same ground. And I suppose, obviously, the question on that will be a student loan scheme that would be as a consideration, and I think it appears from my looking at it anyway that seems to be the view of all the major parties, is that the student loan scheme is the way to go, and kicking it to the committee is a kind of a way of trying to lengthen that decision-making process. But in light of the fact that in England and UK in 2015, student loan debt was £86 billion, and and the fact that as well, I think that USI have estimated that a graduating student in Ireland under a student loan scheme could be paying anywhere between €100 and €150 a month in repayments of their student debt. I just wanted to get the view of, or try and see what the view is within the department as to whether the student loan scheme is something that the department is actively considering, and whether it is something that the review will actually be looking at rolling out.
Well, I think it isn't true that we're, if you like, duplicating, because I think any envisaged future outlined by Peter Castles and his committee would envisage an increased contribution from the Exchequer and an increased contribution from employers. So we are advancing that with an April deadline. So we're in a position, come the next year's budget, to indicate a future path for the funding of higher education. And in this year's budget, based on, if you like, Exchequer resources alone, we've indicated a 3-year path of increased resource. But there's no doubt that Peter Castle's report has also thrown up the issue of whether that will be sufficient, and whether we need to envisage changes in the way we now have funding. as you know, his proposal envisages that there would be no fees at all going into college. So it would be free, if you like, at the point of participation, but there would be a recovery thereafter. He also points out that it would not be like the UK model, but it would be modelled more on the Australian system. I think it's important that members get the chance to tease out the pros and the cons of that approach, so that we can develop an agreed approach, if that is possible, to this issue, if we feel that that's the way forward, and if not, what the alternative would be. I acknowledge there are difficulties with a loan model, but I see also, as the report points out, that there are considerable attractions in it. So I think we need to do the work that the Oireachtas Committee is undertaking, and I hope that we will be in a position come the next budget to indicate a consensus view as to how we should proceed on that issue.
Deputy Pringle, final supplementary.
Thanks, Minister. Just in relation to the Australian model, I mean, the Australian students graduate with up to $50,000 in debt, and I know that there is problems there in terms of repayments, but the overall thing about the student loan scheme is that it's a commercialisation of the third level educational process, and that's something that I don't think that is of value. And how would the department actually prevent that and prevent banks capitalising and looking at students as economic units who they can make profit out of, rather than looking at the educational benefit that well-educated, higher-educated students can contribute overall to our society and economy and to the future? And is that something that the department will give active consideration to, rather than just purely looking at the economics of doing a loan scheme?
Final response.
I don't think it's envisaged that this is some sort of a commercialisation. At the moment, people pay fees, so there are student contributions, and they have to find that, or their parents have to find that while they are studying. What the report is suggesting is that we should look at an alternative where people don't pay anything while they're studying, but that there would be a recovery when their income goes over a certain figure, and that's how they would contribute to the cost of their education. So it's not applying some commercial model, it's using a different profile, if you like, of collecting a contribution from students who participate. And the report has pointed out that people who complete a third level education have considerably higher earning capacity and so on. So I think that's the issue that we need to assess, and I think there will be different views in the House. I know some parties have very strong views. The Students' Union have a view. There are others, obviously, within the universities who have a different view. I think it's our job as an Oireachtas to seek to tease through those views and reach a consensus, if that can be reached.
We'll move